Welcome to the Mind Myself podcast. I'm Esther, and it is my pleasure to be bringing you information about healthcare approaches, health issues, and people's health journey stories, all from the complementary, holistic, and integrative perspectives, helping you become your own best health advocate and helping you make your own informed choices because you matter. Welcome to Conversations with E. I'm Esther, or you can call me E. I'm the founder and CEO of Mind Myself, and I love having these conversations with amazing people. And today I'm particularly keen on the discussion we're going to be having on light and hydration, how important both are and how they're linked. Welcome to this conversation, Rachel. Please tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going into this decidedly juicy topic.
All right. Thank you so much, Esther, for having me. And so again, my name is Rachel Maurice, and I was practicing conventional anesthesia for approximately 20 years. So I went through all of Western schooling and residency in anesthesia, practiced for 20 years until 2021, which I walked away from my medical career and actually changed course and decided that what I was discovering in Western medicine was incomplete in how we look at the body, how the body works, and realizing more that it was more of a disease management system rather than a healthcare system. And so I've been doing a lot of studying, a lot of unlearning, a lot of relearning, and that has led me down some very interesting paths, notably after coming across Dr. Jack Kruse, who is an American neurosurgeon, actually also a dentist and oral surgeon, learning from him about the upstream signals from how traditional and most therapies work from, which is the body as a physical entity, as well as biochemistry. But upstream from that is physics, starting with light, water, and magnetism.
Wow, light, water, and magnetism. And before we dive into that, what modalities have you studied? I know you've looked into energy medicine too. What have you studied?
I've gone through quite a few. Most recently, I've been certified in what's called quantum biology, but that really means looking at the body at the small scale, so below the cell, subcellular, meaning atoms, protons, electrons, and such, as well. But prior to that, a trauma release method called holographic memory resolution. I've studied breath work with Stig Severinsen, the 4-time champion free diver, Reiki 1 and Reiki 2, medical intuition, some meditation with the Heart Math Institute. And I think off the top of my head, that's what I can think of.
Wow. So anybody coming and listening to this conversation knows that you have both an extensive Western medicine background and all of this other study in other realms, which is amazing. When you put the two together, that's what I love, is saying we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Western medicine has so much to offer, but I liked how you said it. It's incomplete. There's so much more as well. And when we put all of those things together, that's when we can really get into root causes, why things happen, how to prevent, etc., etc.
Right.
All right, let's jump into our bodies and hydration and light. Talk about water and our bodies. I know we think we know what all that is, but I suspect we don't.
Yes, well, it's interesting. This was not anything that I was taught in my traditional medical education. Most of the time we think of our bodies as, we hear maybe 60 to 80% water, and that is actually by weight. By molecular count, we are actually 99% water. So 99 out of every 100 molecules is water. So we are actually mainly water bag charged by sunlight, actually. So the water as well, what I've been learning from Dr. Gerald Pollack, is the water inside the body is very different from the water that we drink. So scientifically, the water that we drink, scientists call bulk water. and it's random in nature. Its pH is neutral. There's no charge to it, and there's no real structure to it. But water, interestingly, inside the body is actually structured like it acts like a crystal, a liquid crystal. So what a crystal is, basically there is a repeating structural pattern to something. We think of it more as in solid materials like crystals, like quartz crystal. But in our body, the water is liquid, but it's also structured. And Dr. Pollack has termed this water EZ water, as in the letter E and then Z, we call Z, but Z, it's a nice ring to it, EZ water, exclusion zone water. So the water in our body actually, next to every hydrophilic surface, meaning water-loving surface, the water in our body actually turns into this structure. It structures itself in layers. And we think of water as H2O. Most people understand H2O as water. In this crystalline structure, it's actually H3O2. So why that's important is there's a separation of charge there. So next to, let's say, a cell's membrane, which is a hydrophilic surface, a water-loving surface, there is a negative zone. So a negative with full of electrons. And then beside that, there is a positive zone, which is full of protons. So there's a separation of charge there. And that, in essence, when you have a separation of charge, acts like a battery. And in Dr. Pollack's lab, he actually he actually was successful, but he put little electrodes into both the negative zone and the positive zone and was able to power a light bulb with doing this. And so that is now, it's not just himself. There are other people who have come to this study as well. But basically, that is our body battery. Most of us have been taught that ATP within the cell, the mitochondria in the cell that makes the energy, the powerhouse of the cell, makes ATP, and ATP is the energy currency of the cell. But in fact, several people have challenged this, and mathematically, it actually doesn't pan out. And it seems now as though this water that we make inside of our body that is charged, there's a separation of charge, is our battery. And that gives us the negative charge that we use as energy in the body.
Wow. So we knew water was important, but now it's become way more important. And before we go further into that conversation, I noticed that your hands turn a little bit red when you move them, which is fabulous. Can you just tell us about the red light that you're using before we go further in this?
Yes, I do. So I have a red light panel on beside me, and I have that on in particular when I'm indoors and in front of a computer, because the computers, all of our electronics emit exclusively blue light. And in nature, under natural light, we never have any light in isolation. And so from sunrise to sunset, we have over 50% of the light that comes to the earth is red and infrared light. So there is always that balance and actually that abundance of red and infrared. And when we're indoors, because modern windows actually block most of the red and infrared, including ultraviolet, we are actually devoid of red and infrared when we are indoors. So I just have my red light panel on next to me whenever I'm indoors, and especially on the computer.
Excellent. I'm going to go get me one of those. Maybe you could share your source later, but that's another conversation. Back to the water discussion. So since we're 99% made up of water, and that's our energy source or our battery source, what are the implications of that? And drinking water, what does that mean? Does it actually do anything?
Right. So yes, most people are told, right? Drink your 8 glasses of water a day, whatever that is. And that's good for your hydration. But when you drink water, the water that you drink goes to a different place most of the time than inside the cell. So when we drink the water, yes, it hydrates us from the standpoint that in our vascular system, so our blood volume, that's where a lot of the water goes that we drink, as well as into the tissues. But most of the time that water stays outside of the cells. If we add electrolytes with minerals like salt, Celtic sea salt, it has all the other trace minerals with it. that will help draw some of that water inside the cell, but that's not the predominant way that we hydrate and get water inside the cell. The main way that we get water inside the cell is actually we produce our own water. So that's also very novel, because in school, what we were taught in cell biology, the mitochondria makes ATP, and as a byproduct, so it's really not important, that's kind of the understanding attached to byproduct, is we make water and carbon dioxide. And I don't even think we were told we make infrared light, and as well as reactive oxygen species, otherwise known as free radicals. But that water inside the cell, inside the mitochondria that we make, that is extremely valuable water. And that is how we predominantly hydrate ourselves inside the cell. So another important point of note with the water that we make inside the cell is it's called deuterium depleted water. And so the whole kind of machinations of glycolysis, and then the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport cycle, it doesn't really know, people don't have to know what that means, but all these cycles that take place in the cell is actually to get rid of deuterium that we take in, usually by drinking water and with food. So what deuterium is, without getting too complicated, is our body, most people understand hydrogen. And we know as water as H2O, that H is hydrogen. So hydrogen is found in 3 forms on Earth, but the 2 forms that we use are, so one of them just regular hydrogen, it's actually called protium, and the other one is called deuterium. Now the difference is hydrogen just has a proton in the nucleus, so it's got a positive charge, just like, imagine like a basketball, and deuterium has a proton and a neutron, so imagine like 2 basketballs. So the charge doesn't change, but because the neutron is neutral, but the size and the weight changes. And where that is important, and it is very important, is that in the last step of all those things that I just said, where we make ATP, the motor, how ATP is made is there's a whole bunch of hydrogens that go through this motor, and then it spits out ATP on the other end. So if you imagine it like a basketball hoop, the motor is like a basketball hoop, and the hydrogen is like a basketball. So then one hydrogen goes through this motor, like fits like a glove, and you churn out ATP on the other end. But if you have deuterium going through, which is like 2 basketballs, you either can't get through, the deuterium can't get through, it either breaks the motor, or it then backs up all of the steps behind it, which causes a whole host of problems. So we have a mechanism to deplete deuterium. However, unfortunately, with the way our food industry has gone, a lot of the processed foods are heavily deuterated. So they've got so just to say, seawater at the equator is about 155 parts per million of deuterium. So it's naturally occurring. If you were to eat something that's 165 parts per million, that's high deuterium. Processed foods are in the order, and processed oils, the vegetable oils, are in the order of 200 to 300 parts per million of deuterium. So the problem there is it destroys the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is how we produce our energy, our water, our ATP, our light, it does a whole host of other things, but that water is really crucial. So if we destroy the mitochondria, then we are destroying our health.
Oh my gosh. The implications of this are awful and incredible and also inspiring. So then my next question to you is, so what do we do about that? Certainly avoid processed foods and seed oils, which we're hearing a lot more about lately because of toxicity and production values and all of that, and they're not actually what we think they are. But now I'm hearing there's yet an even deeper reason for this. So avoid those things. But practically speaking, in my everyday life, how do I increase my water, the healthy kind, in my system?
Okay, so increasing the water that we make in the mitochondria means that we have to give the right signals to our mitochondria. So what those signals are making sure we get an abundance as much as we can of natural light outdoors. And we avoid as much as we can the artificial light indoors, especially at night. So that meaning we could use blue blocking glasses at night, which I think is the easiest when you can't set your household with everybody inside on the same page. I mean, for myself, I do change the light bulbs. I've got half red light bulbs and half incandescent, because the incandescent still has the red and infrared, whereas the LEDs don't, and the fluorescent and halogen don't. The red and infrared are also extremely important, because red light actually targets one of the respiratory proteins in the electron transport chain, which is the one that makes water. It's that step that makes water. So if red light can actually target that specific protein, it can increase water production. So red light, which is in abundance outside, as I said, from sunrise to sunset, it's over 50% red and infrared for 365 days of the year, regardless of the weather. We have that available to us outside. So what that does is it increases our water production. And then the infrared, the far infrared, because infrared is divided up into infrared A, B, and C. And that far infrared, which is what most infrared saunas are made from. What that does is it actually increases it changes the bonding between the hydrogen and oxygen, such that it actually increases the exclusion zone water layer in our body by 4 times the amount.
What is the exclusion layer? What does that mean?
Sorry, that is the easy water layer that I was talking about, that is inside our body next to the biological surfaces. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I wanted to say, so he termed it EZ, exclusion zone water, because it excludes anything that is larger than an electron or a photon, a particle of light. Meaning, even if you have toxins, bacteria or anything like that circulating in your body, if you have a robust exclusion zone layer in your body, then it will not be able to penetrate into the cells. As well, if you've got toxins inside of your cell, what happens is, if you have a nice, thick, and good, robust exclusion zone, it will expel toxins out from the cell. So it's actually extremely important to have that nice exclusion zone layer. And another point as well, all of these wireless technologies, Wi-Fi, 5G, all of that stuff is dehydrating to our cells. It actually, in the research, has shown that it dehydrates our cells up to 15 to 20%.
Wow. So we've been talking at the molecular level, the cellular level here. Let's come out to a little bit more of the macro level and go, okay, so I'm made up of all these microorganisms and cells and all of those things that go into making them. Now I'm this being, and I'm here, and I'm looking at you, I'm talking to you, I'm eating my food, I'm doing my work. I work inside, I sit at my desk in front of a computer. I do wear my blue light blocking glasses every day, otherwise I couldn't do it. But what I'm also hearing is there are things bombarding us that are taking the water away from our cells, and we're not even realizing it. And we think by drinking water we're going to replace it. And I'm hearing you say, no. What do we do from this macro?
Yes. Well, there is a lot that can be done, and a lot that can, it's sort of, one has to take into consideration people's different lifestyles, because everyone is different, and the circumstances and the environment that they're in. But really, realistically, is more natural light, less artificial light. What we can do to increase the amount of water that we produce is get as much red light and infrared, near infrared light as possible. So the free source is outside, regardless of the weather, regardless of the temperature, regardless of where you are on Earth. From sunrise to sunset, we have an abundance of free red and infrared light. The infrared, that far infrared that increases that water layer, actually, you can even increase that further if you are in a green zone outside, anything with foliage, because the red and infrared actually reflect off of the greenery. So you can actually kind of get, it's like you'd be inside of a, I don't know, something that increases it significantly. But you'd also want to do a lot of grounding, because grounding pulls in electrons. It's a huge repository. The Earth is a repository of electrons. It's like an endless repository of electrons. So grounding actually pulls in electrons, which will increase that negative layer in that water layer. So you're then charging that. The sunlight from ultraviolet light also charges and gives you excited electrons in your body. So light is paramount.
Mm.
Grounding, anything that you can generate heat, because heat also increases the water, right? It was talking about the infrared C and the saunas, increasing that up to 4 times. So anything that produces heat. So movement, most people think of as movement as building muscles and it being good for you because you're increasing your metabolism, but actually movement moves your muscles, it moves your bones, and it moves the fascia, which is piezoelectric, which generates electrons.
Mm.
So yeah, there's that. Anything else? That hot baths make you generate heat as well. So you can increase your hydration that way. Infrared saunas, any saunas that make you sweat. Making sure that you eat locally and seasonally. So this is a big one because there's so much emphasis on food in our society. Even so, I don't know if you've seen, or anybody who's watching has seen lately, Dr. Casey and Callie Means. So she was I think Harvard or Stanford trained ENT surgeon who left before she actually finished her residency, and she's now heavily focused on food. She's been on Tucker Carlson. She's been speaking in front of the Senate, but talking about food, but more so not from the perspective that I speak about it, or people in the quantum biology community speak about it, which is more because the way we see it is light is tied to food. So when you grow food in a certain environment, it's basically harnessing the light in the food material. And when you eat that food, you are releasing that light inside your body. So for example, I'm in the interior of BC in Canada. We're not growing pineapples and mangoes here ever. So if I were to eat a pineapple, which came from another part of the world, when I metabolize that, then the light that's released from that mango is coming from another part of the world. And inside my body, it's going to say, well, hang on a second. That's not the light that I'm seeing through my eyes and through my skin in this environment. So there's a disconnect. So it can actually cause problems inside the body. As well, as I said, at the equator, the water has 155 parts per million of deuterium. As you move up in latitude, the deuterium content is depleted, it diminishes. So we don't have the ultraviolet light the same timing of the year and for the same length of time, because ultraviolet light helps deplete deuterium as well. So if we eat something that has a heavy amount of deuterium in it, like a pineapple, I don't have the light environment to be able to get rid of that deuterium. So I'm kind of making things worse in my.
Interesting. How would coconut fit into that? Same? Wow. Oh, there's so much to learn and know. Let's talk about, since this is all light based, and I could pick your brain for hours, but we have a very limited time here. Let's talk about the LifeWave technology and it reflecting light back into our bodies. I know that you've chosen to embrace this technology, as I have. Can you talk about it in the context of this discussion we're having?
Right. Yes. Well, so it's fascinating because I have my red light panel here, and before everything was about the red light panel because it targets the mitochondria. which increases energy production, water production, all the things that I was talking about, that which is tied to health. So when I came across these patches and I started learning about them, again, one thing that we are not taught in medicine and most of the general population doesn't understand is we produce light because we don't see it. So usually what we don't see, what we can't see in our environment, we don't think exists. But we actually produce light in our mitochondria. We produce an infrared light. We also produce an ultra weak ultraviolet light. That's for a different story. But this infrared light is what David Schmidt, the inventor of LifeWave, was able to discover was which frequencies he could find to reflect back into the body and cause specific biochemical changes. So this recent patch that was released in 2019 is one that he discovered how to reflect specific frequencies of light to then increase this special copper peptide, which there's 50 years of research on, the GHKCU copper peptide, to increase stem cell activation. So increasing
or universal cells, if you don't want to say the word stem cell.
Okay, universal cells. And those universal cells are what replace that are damaged and dead cells, and we are constantly turning over cells. But as we age, those universal cells go dormant. And I was floored by the percentage. By the time we're 30, 50% have gone dormant. By the time we're 60, 90% have gone dormant. So our healing really is very slowed down. So basically these patches, they don't actually do any healing. They enhance, using your own light, they enhance your body's own mechanisms to speed up the healing.
Wow. And you're talking about the X39 patch, right? That was in 2019. And then subsequently X49, which is AHKCU,
Right.
the copper. So activating our own cells, and in the conversation about water and light, and it's all based on light. And if we're reminding ourselves of what they know how to do already, but they've just been inundated with this now that I've heard about deuterium and all the toxins and everything else that's happening around us. This is a technology that can remind ourselves that they know what to do, but then it reactivates them. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, it enhances our ability to do what our body already knows how to do. And so what's interesting that kind of pulls things together for me is the reason that we need hydration. It's critical to be hydrated for these patches to work is because they work through light, and because we were just talking about how water is charged, made, and activated by light in our body, and that's how we communicate. That's why it's so important for us to be adequately, properly cellularly hydrated using these patches.
Well, so in addition to using the patch technology, just putting a little patch on your body and going about your life, you're still emphasizing, Rachel, that we should be going outside. We definitely, and I know David talks about this, we need to move our bodies. We need to drink water, even though this conversation, we're making it, but we still need to drink it. We need to eat whole, healthy foods, and ideally from our own natural environment and seasonally, and as clean as possible, organic if we can, but as clean as possible with soil that isn't depleted, etc. So all of those things contribute. And then when we use the light patch, it reflects the light back into us at specific frequencies, so that our bodies can do the job they're actually designed to do.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Amazing.
And that reminds me, just what you said, exactly. The patches are a tool, but they're not a replacement. I try to make sure I say this every time I do a talk, is that they're not a replacement for a healthy lifestyle. So, excuse me, we still have to do all those things that you just mentioned, right? It's not like I can use these patches and I don't have to worry about eating properly and drinking and moving. And so we still have to give our body the right signals.
Absolutely. How can we wrap up this conversation? So we've got some technologies, we've got some things to do, like eating, drinking, exercising, go outside in the light, grounding. Oh, and I did want to know, What about those other grounding technologies that are not just standing on the earth with our feet? I'd love your thoughts on those. But all of those things, and then we also have this assistance, the patch, LifeWave patches. How do you put this all together, and how do you want to wrap up and leave this conversation? What's the next step for somebody to do around hydrating our cells?
Yes. So, well, I guess it really is what I tell people is we have to start somewhere because everybody's at a different point, and it's about progress over perfection because one can get really overwhelmed. I've got a list of pages of things that can be done. And when someone asks me personally what I do, I know that if I shared with them, they would kind of be like a deer in headlights and say, well, I can't do everything like that, so I'm just not going to do anything. So that I really try to emphasize with people that to start somewhere, and really the light is the most important starting point. And however that can be done, and everyone's different, but watching the sunrise every day with naked eyes is at the top of the list. But I know that can be hard for some people who don't get up at the sunrise time. And what I would say to that, and what I have done in a program that I'm going to be releasing shortly, is for people who don't get up early, is I get them to buy blue blockers, because there are affordable ones. There are ones that are only $30, and start to wear those at night after the sun sets, because against your will, you will start to get tired because you are blocking the blue light that is sending the signals daytime, and you are increasing your melatonin, which will make you tired. So you will start to go to bed earlier, which will then shift your sleeping patterns, and then you'll be able to get up earlier. So light, getting as much natural light as possible, getting outside. The morning hours are really critical. It's more important to get the morning sunlight than afternoon sunlight if you can only get one. But the other thing that I would say, if it's okay to share here, is there's a challenge that this community that I'm involved with has put together. It's a free 21-day challenge, and it's called thecrdchallenge.com. And it's the Circadian Rhythm Disruption Challenge. And what they're going to do is they put together a whole bunch of information that they will be releasing daily starting October 20th, to help people, to educate people, and help people walk through changes in their lives to be able to help and shift their lives back to a more circadian friendly lifestyle, even in this modern world. But what I would say to wrapping it up, like how you were asking, I'm just thinking there's so many things that I could say, but really, ultimately, what brings us back to health is getting back to the environmental signals of nature. So anything that is connected to nature and how we used to live in harmony with nature will restore health. So unfortunately, modernization has taken us away from that. So the more modern a lifestyle, unfortunately, the more symptoms we could develop. So there are technologies and things that can mitigate that and the problems, and so that we can still live a modern lifestyle but also get proper signaling. But really, ultimately, it has to do with returning to the signals that we have evolved under, and that is under nature.
Wow, so much to think about. Rachel, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. I want to continue the conversation, but we don't have time today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for this information about water. And some of it might be a little technical for some people, but you're here and listening, and this is fantastic. So thank you for bringing your wisdom, your research, your information, and your care. I feel your care in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we're doing this because you matter.